So I think we'll have to.
As you know, you just pick out what you want to. So there's about maybe I think around 16 beers on the wall on the notice board. So I said, oh, one of them. Can I have
Right, okay, so the process is very similar to home brewing, except it's an industrial kind of scale, you know what I mean? So the first thing that it gets done in any kind of brew is you pick the grains and hops that we're going to use for the brew, okay? So this is the Origins Brewery, this is where you see the Origins bottles, this is where this is all made, and the brewer here is Dan. He does it himself, he's an independent brewer, but he's still part of our kind of brew community here, okay? So this actually used to be the first brewery for Fyne Ales, this shed here, and it's over 200 years old. It used to be a dairy farm back at the start before we even started thinking about brewing beer, and this is where we actually used to keep the cows and stuff. This used to be the shed we kept the cows in. So it used to be Johnny Delap and Tuggy Delap that owned the farm. The Tuggy still owns the farm, but unfortunately Johnny's not with us anymore, okay? Highlander, what's on draft in them bottles, that was the first beer made, and it was made in this brewery right here. It was Johnny that done a bit of home brewing back in the day. He loved doing home brewing, so he decided to come up with a recipe with a few of his friends, and decided to do it in here, and then start buying second-hand equipment to upscale his project, and eventually he came up with a perfect recipe, which is Highlander, and that was made on St Andrew's Day 2001, okay? So the first thing we do, as I said, we get the hops and the grains. That wooden box up there, if you can kind of see it, that's where Dan stores all these grains and hops that he needed for the brew, just to make the base. So he weighs it out in that wee scaling bucket behind there, takes whatever he needs and puts it into this big bucket, which is called the mash tun. Okay? So after he's got all these hops and grains, what he wants in here, he then collects the water. We get our water from a reservoir at the top of the hill then. It's just rainwater. We take it down the hill, we filter it, and then we put it into big storage tanks like that big green tank just behind you there. Okay? So after all that, we take the water, we put it into a big kettle basically, and we take up to around 90 degrees Celsius. We just want to kind of get the water ready before we put it into the actual mash tun and start extracting the flavours from the hops and the grains. Okay? So as I said, we take this and then we put it into the mash tun. We let it kind of brew, we let it steep in there. It's like making a nice pot of soup, you know. So we're just extracting the flavours from the hops, the grains, and at this point he starts adding in other things to add to the aroma, to the taste, such as citra, malted barley, pale barley. It just depends on what he actually wants and what he's looking out to make a beer. Okay, so after he's kind of let it settle in here for about a day or two, he then takes it all out and then he puts it into a big other kettle, and he takes it about 70 degrees Celsius. Now this is just to kind of help get all the flavours out again, just to keep everything moving. Again, like a pot of soup, you keep stirring it every now and again, just to keep everything going.
That's everything, he leaves the solids in there still.
The solids are molecular bits, so you get filmed about as it comes back out. So if you want to maybe look inside at the very bottom, there's a grate. So as he's pulling all the stuff out using that big valve there, he gets put into the bigger tank. All the solids are left in the bottom using that grate. Okay. There's also one of these copper tubes in here. It's got a bunch of holes in it, so as water's forced through there, it spins at some amount of speed and just keeps everything rotating inside it, keep churning the whole thing, because we don't want it to settle as it's steeping inside. Otherwise the flavours just don't extract properly and you don't get a great tasting beer at the end. This is called a 10 barrel kit. So you make roughly about £3,000 per brew in here. Okay. The bigger brewery, that's a 40 barrel kit, so they do roughly about £12,000 per brew. The thing is, the bigger brewery does run about 2 to 3 brews a week, just depending on the style of beer again. In here, Dan, he usually does a brew every 2 weeks because he does everything all manual. Over there, it's pretty automated.
Yeah.
So this is an old style kit, I forgot to say, so it uses steam. There's no gas mains here, there's no water mains here. As I said, we get the water from the hill, but we use steam to heat everything up in here. So this is all second-hand equipment. The equipment is roughly about 30, 40 years old itself, just because it's from another brewery that shut down and Johnny bought it over to turn it into his own kit. But before it gets pumped, it goes through this thing here, which is called a heat exchanger. So basically what it does is you put hot liquid through, you put cold liquid through the other way. It doesn't ever touch each other, but it takes the heat from the hot source and turns it colder, so we can cool it down to a more kind of room temperature, so that we can get it ready to add yeast to it and the sugars to it, so we can start the fermentation process. We don't want it too cold because the yeast will just not do anything. We don't want it too hot because the yeast will just simply die. So we need it kind of around the perfect temperature between room temperature and 50 degrees. It just depends on what style of beer you're trying to make and what you're trying to actually get out of your beer. And the reason it's a lot warmer is because you don't want the yeast to die. Like I said, we want to kind of keep it room temperature there and just above it, just so it allows the yeast to have a happy life, process all its sugars and then turn it into alcohol a lot easier. Okay, so this is the big tank here, which means adding yeast and all the sugars to it. Dan adds whatever he wants in here, and then you just let it kind of ferment in there for a couple of days before he transfers it into a wooden cask. Okay, so the way Dan does his beers, he does an older style technique which is called spontaneous fermentation. Okay, so basically what that means is that he adds the yeast and the sugars, but the beer tells us when it's done. So the yeast and the sugars could take 4 weeks, 4 months, 8 years, we don't know. It tells us when it's ready, it's fermented. Yeah, basically, so it ferments all the sugar into alcohol. But again, the unique thing about spontaneous fermentation with all the Origins beers, you can only ever make that flavour once. Unfortunately, like, even if you had the same hops, same amount, same process, done everything exactly the same, it might come out completely differently. It probably will, so you can never really kind of recreate the same flavour as we all do. Okay, if you want to take a look in one of the casks, you actually see a kind of foam on top of it. It's just a skin. Now that is all the yeast and the bacteria doing its work. Yeah. Okay, so as I said, that's just all the yeast and the bacteria doing its work in the casks here. The Dan chooses the wooden casks. Again, it's a more traditional way of him actually doing it. Some of the casks are about 80 years old, as you can tell by the wear and tear on them. This particular cask here is 150 years old round about, and it's actually from the John Walker distillery back in 1831. Saying on it. So you can imagine how long this has been kicking about between brewer to brewer to brewer. Unfortunately, the flavour of the whiskey is not in the cask anymore because it is just at all. But it's the flavour of the wood as well that actually changes the flavour.
I'm always surprised they can survive that long, you know, like,
well, if you have it, you know, if you have it in a room like this, with the temperature and humidity is all controlled, they could last almost indefinitely. That's the beauty of the wooden casks. I mean, there's wooden casks that people find that have been missing for years and years and years, and we find it, and it's either rum or whiskey or whatever. But the part of the wooden cask as well is because it actually allows oxygen to still get into the beer, because the yeast needs to breathe. So it's not as if you just seal it up in a container and let it go. You need to actually let the yeast have oxygen to breathe as well. So that's the point in the wooden casks, because it allows oxygen both between the wood and allowing the yeast to actually breathe as well. So it's not just for show, it's not just for flavour, there's other things that benefit from using a wooden cask rather than just putting it in a big steel tank like here. Yeah. Okay, so this is the conditioning room. This is round about the last step before it goes into a bottle. Now, the point of this room is, once the yeast has done its job, the yeast is still inside the beer. Now, you don't want to actually drink the yeast because it's not going to taste very nice, so we need to extract that yeast. Okay, there's a couple of ways you can do that. Now, the old way of doing things, which Dan still uses, is Fyne Ales, okay, which is actually made from fish scales, believe it or not. So what they do is they process this fish scales, they process it into a powder, they add the powder to the vat, leave it a few days, and then it collects all the yeast and the protein molecules that you don't want in a beer and settles at the bottom of the tank. The other process they use, I think it's zinc, it's a form of zinc they use. The zinc does the same job, it collects the yeast and the protein, it settles at the bottom of the tank, It does affect the flavour and what type of technique you do use. So we use Fyne glass for a lot of our beers, hence why it's not vegan friendly, I'm afraid. But some of the beers that we do use the zinc technique. But again, it affects the flavour, so we try to keep to the traditional ways of actually doing things. I'm sorry, is that bad?
Dog.
Yeah, that's the brewer boat.
The brewer's a dog? I didn't know that.
Magic brewer.
That makes me think the Simpsons episode needs more dog.
Yeah. So Dan's got a very special way of collecting yeast. He actually uses natural yeast. So in these plastic tanks here is, I'm not too sure what skin it is, but it's fruit skins. So he puts the fruit skins in a vat and collects the yeast that is collected from the fruit skins. And he uses that yeast in his beers, just depending on the brew you want. So you use different types of fruit skins and stuff like that. Everything affects the flavour of a brew. Even adding a tiny bit of citra, and there's no citra in it, even a gram of it in a big vat will change the flavour of the beer. But again, you will have a name for a flavour that you kind of want, but every beer that is done by Origins is always an experiment because it's never ever going to be the same flavour no matter what it is. All the Origins beers and the Mills Hills, the stouts, they're actually bottled on site, but unfortunately the other ones, the cans, the bottles by Fyne Ales is not, just due to the fact that we need a whole bottle plantation and it's just too much money at that point. So we have another company doing that for us. I can't remember the name of the company, to be perfectly honest here, because I've just got so much information I need to remember about this place. But the reason we don't allow the company to bottle Origins or Mills Hills is simply because it's premium beer, so it's too expensive to let out in this factory here. And plus we need to transport them in wooden casks, which is very unethical as well. Okay, so believe it or not, we've actually got Italian and Swedish distributors. So a lot of our beers are actually in Europe. I know for a fact there's a little pub in Rome that has Jarl and Highlander on tap all year round. So a little microbrewery in Scotland is actually conquered Rome, which is very, very impressive from my point of view. Now, the reason we use key kegs, do you know yourself?
Light and easy.
Light and easy, there we go. So for other people that don't know, it's light and easy to transport, keeps the costs down, and it keeps the beer nice also, because the fact is, if the truck
Stays fresh as well.
That is also correct, because if you put it in a wooden cask, see, because the cask has still got yeast inside of it, the shelf life for it, once the yeast has done its job, is round about a month, absolute max that you can sell this beer. So to get this to Italy within a month and sold within that month is completely unethical. So the best and proper way to do it is using key kegs. Now, unfortunately, using key kegs that is pasteurised, so there's no yeast living inside of it, and you've got to force carbon dioxide inside of it to allow it to be fizzy. That's the point, is because it extends the shelf life to months, not days, you know what I mean? So we can get it to Italy, we can get it to Rome, we can get it to places across the world, and it will still be as fresh as it was the day it was brewed, you know? But that's the difficult thing. If you want to taste fresh, live beer, you need to kind of come to the distillery, because our local area surrounding, because it's very hard to actually transport live beer. That's why a lot of places use key kegs or just big kegs. And unfortunately I can't show you because we're not in a bigger brewery today. But it's just these big 30 barrel kegs, you know. So the good thing is that Tubby, the owner of the farm, when she passed the brewery down to her son, Jamie Delapp, he allows us to have pints for our lunch. And he allows us to take pints home for free at the end of the night, simply because he's already paid the beer tax, so it's not a loss to him. But he sees it this way, that he would rather the beer be drunk than pouring it down the drain. So he allows the staff members to have free pints and stuff like that to take home at the end of the night. I mean, this is why I'm like belly on. It's getting there, it's getting there. We do fill the casks on site. The only thing it doesn't is the bottles and the cans for Fyne Ales. Origins and Mills is bottled on site using the machine just behind you there. So again, it's just too expensive to let away, because it is a premium beer. It's again, it's a different way. So they use forced fermentation, if you know what that is yourself. So for others that don't, they just basically chuck yeast and sugar in it. They know how long it's going to be. Generally, you're talking about at least 2-3 weeks before it's fully fermented. Just depends on the type of beer. Jarl is about 2.5-3 weeks before it's actually went through the conditioning process and bottled. Highlander, I'm pretty sure, is an extra week on top of that, and then other ones could be longer, it could be shorter. But the point is, we know how long it's going to take. We just keep adding sugar until the yeast is completely done. The spontaneous fermentation, we don't know because it's natural yeast. The one we do, we have a 200-year-old culture that is actually grown in a lab for us in Edinburgh. So we use that, and we can reproduce that quite a few times before we need to actually get a new batch of yeast in. We use the yeast as much as we can without it actually affecting the quality and the flavour of the beer. Dan himself, because he's using natural yeast loves harsh conditions. It can thrive in harsh conditions better than lab-grown yeast. So Dan can use his yeast more than what the bigger breweries can. Round about 14, 13 times for each brew he can use the yeast. The bigger brewery is around about 6 to 7 times. Again, it just depends on the strain that we put the yeast through, and it just depends on the type of beer we're making as well. Fyne Ales, what we do for our classic range and all that, we use the same type of yeast for all of them. Dan, he uses his own yeast.
Yeah.
So he cultures his own yeast. So again, with the pints, it's different types of yeast he uses for his beers, just depending on what type of beer he wants to make. So at Shandor, there's one called Briac Graf, it's called, and he uses apple pomace, which is the byproduct of cider, so it gives a nice kind of cidery, crisp taste after it. He's got another one called Nadar Gooseberry, which he uses Scottish wild gooseberries in the aging process. It gives a nice kind of tart, a wee bit sour on the tongue kind of beer.
Is that what those jars were on top of there?
Yeah, that's what the gooseberries were, exactly. Yeah, we are absolutely correct. So that's him starting the new fermentation process for a gooseberry beer. It's not going to be the same as Nadar Gooseberry because, again, you can only pre-create that beer once. But I don't know what type of beer he's going to use it in. I just know he's getting it ready to stick it into a tank with the beer.